Okay, we are ready to go.
All right, so welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us at this virtual event. For those of you that don't know, I'm Crystal Hartman, Chief Chaos Officer at the Arkansas Center for Data Sciences, more so known as ACDS. ACDS is a nonprofit organization dedicated to building and retaining top data science and IT talent in the state of Arkansas. One of our main objectives is to facilitate apprenticeship programs in the state with companies large and small across all industries. Since one of our programs is Data Analyst, we're excited to host this event today, Day in the Life of a Data Analyst, to really showcase what an average day looks like aside from what you may learn in school or view on the World Wide Web. So today's event features Quint Heady, Senior Data Analyst at ElToro and co-founder at properties.com. We're excited to have Quint share his experience in and expertise of data science and analytics. If you have any questions during the discussion, please feel free to drop them in chat, and we'll also plan to open up for Q&A at the end of the event. So without further ado, and what we're all really here for, what does a day in the life of a data analyst really look like? Again, thank you, Quint, so much for being with us today. If you can just start by introducing yourself and sharing a little bit about your background to get us started.
Sure, yeah, thank you for having me. And then we also have Trey on the call too. He's another co-founder at Properties and our CEO. So it's cool to have him as well. If I say anything, out of ordinary, he'll correct me.
No pressure.
No pressure. A little bit about me. I'm 28. I've lived in Louisville, Kentucky my whole life. I've played baseball my entire life, all through college. I attended Northern Kentucky University, where I played baseball. I got a bachelor's degree in finance, and come to find out after I graduated and had a couple internships in finance and, investments and, sales, and come to find out it wasn't, it wasn't super math based like I thought it was going to be, and, analytical and all that. It was mostly sales and, getting people to invest with you. So I didn't, like that a ton. So in my 5th year playing baseball at Northern Kentucky, I started my master's degree in business informatics and data analytics. And that's where I learned a lot about, really in depth in Excel, which was the building block of, the data analytics, foundation that I have. Since Excel, I've learned a lot more, different analytics, platforms that I'll go into a little bit here in a minute. But yeah, so I had those two, and then actually my first job after graduating college was with ElToro, and I started as a ad operations intern. If you're unfamiliar with ElToro, ElToro is an ad tech company. So we hold patents, I think five issued patents, and then 7 or 8 pending patents around the ad tech industry. Our main 2 patents that we use at Properties and at ElToro are going to be the IP targeting algorithm. So that's where a client or us can, load lists of addresses, or what we call geoframe them out, and use the IP addresses of those locations in order to more accurately target digital ads on behalf of our clients. So that's one of the building blocks of our technology. And then the other one is what we call geoframing or venue replay, where we draw a physical frame in our system around any location in the country. So I'll use a quick service restaurant as an example. So if we have a Subway or a KFC or a Taco Bell or whoever is a client, and they say, we want to model out, the locations in a specific region. We want to know, more information about our locations, right? Because they don't always get, credit card transaction data or home address data on who their customers actually are. So what our technology allows them to do is, and this is where my job is and what I build, is we build human behavior models for our clients. So inside those frames, we can pull the device IDs if they're, active on the web or apps from those specific locations. So the locations we draw around all have a latitude and longitude associated to them. Every single ad call and your device ID when you opt into apps and things like Spotify, Waze, weather.com, all that, they sell some of that data. They don't sell everything, but the only three things that we care about is, did an ad call go through on that device? Does that ad call have a latitude and longitude, and then a mobile ad ID, right? So we take that data and say, okay, we see, X number of devices at your store. What's really interesting is we can then take that and correlate those to their competitors. And we can say, okay, of the devices we see going to your location, we see 22% of them going across the street to the Taco Bell across the street. And then what's even further interesting and a little scary is we tie that into our IP targeting algorithm, because the IP algorithm uses a lot of connected app data, IP consistency at the home, things like that. We then can say, okay, these device IDs we see at this location, in the wild, like a KFC or a Taco Bell or a convention, it doesn't really matter where, as long as we identify what it is and draw a correct frame, we can pull data from it. We can tie those devices back to a home address that they're most frequently seen at, because of the data that we're seeing from that phone and the data we're seeing at a home address. And then from there, what we do is what we call a behavior scape, is we can then say, okay, Taco Bell, KFC, Subway, whoever it is, we can say, okay, the main demographic of people coming to your locations is higher end people, low end, any demographic profile at the household level. Since we're getting back to, we can pull, through an Experian file or an Axiom file. And that's really interesting to me. And that's what I love doing, is getting a project that's a blank canvas and then building something from scratch that, is a custom ask from a client. Sorry, Crystal, I kind of went a little.
No, it's great. So, as you're kind of describing your background and just kind of how you got to here, can you go a little bit more in depth of what a typical day for you looks like?
Yeah. Oh, and I kind of skipped over how I got to be a data analyst. So I was an intern at ElToro. I worked a lot in some of our processes and operations weren't automated, and they were pretty tedious. So I pretty much taught myself, and there were a couple other guys that I worked with, where we taught ourselves how to, use VBA code in Excel, which is super, compared to some of the stuff that's out there, it's pretty basic. But from a building block standpoint, understanding how to automate things in Excel, even if it's just in Excel, that's a good start. In learning, analytics, or learning how to automate something on your own. If you don't, have a background in Python or, an actual coding language, VBA is a good start, or a good starting point, at least in my opinion. Same thing with, statistics and other analytics, index matching, pulling in different data from, a like data source where you don't necessarily have all the pieces in the one that you're wanting to use. You can pull data in. Same thing with Power Query in Excel as well. If you're using Power Query to pull data from Excel into Power BI, which is a platform that I'm most fluent in DAX language and things like that. So a lot of that was simply self-taught. Now, my master's program did teach me a lot of SPSS, Excel. I'm trying to think back, that was 4 or 5 years ago. It was good building block teaching moments in in a master's program. But it's really once you get an internship and get a solid understanding of how a business actually works that you start getting hands-on. School's great. A lot of times people just try to get to the test, pass the test, and then the information's gone, right? Because you're not using it every day. But once you're using it every day, that's when you can actually build a skill and not just a memorized, memorized thing that you have to get through just to pass, right?
So question, just kind of going to that. So what would be some attributes or skills or kind of characteristics of someone that would be successful in the role that you're in?
I think the skills would be applicable across many different roles, not just a data analyst, right? You got to be hardworking. You have to actually want to learn. You're going to have to teach yourself a lot. At least for me, I learn more by teaching myself how to do something than just watching somebody else do something. I know some people can look at something and be like, oh, I understand that fully, right? Where me, I have to be like, okay, I saw you do it. Now I have to do it, right? To understand and learn how to do that. What was the question again?
What would be some skills or characteristics or attributes that someone should have in order to be successful in the role that you're in?
Yeah, so at the very basic, at least in my personal role, now if I went to a different company or didn't get hired by ElToro initially, these skills might not apply 100%, but I would say an Excel background, heavy Excel background is a key starting point. It's the most basic, analytic tool that you can use. Whether it just be summing different calculations, sum if, count if, index matching, VLOOKUPs, things like that. They're super basic, but the understanding of how they work can apply to many different platforms. Like Power BI, I know it's Microsoft Power BI is an evolution of, Excel and Power Query. And then, Access as well. Access is super basic as a database, but it's still a building block that can help you understand a more refined platform like Power BI, where there's a lot of visuals. There's a lot of, you can put, R script in there. You can put many different, I've probably learned 150 different DAX code languages in Power BI in the last 2 years since I've been working with it. And you can do some pretty incredible things with it, even down to geolocation data, using Haversine formulas, statistical formulas, things like that. If they want, radiuses around a location, it's like, okay, we only want to look at the people who live within 3 miles of this spot. Okay, done. And that's a formula and a function, right? And you can visualize that data. I would say another skill would be to have an imagination where you're not just focused on, a single track mind. Like there's several different ways that, when I first started in Power BI, I thought, okay, I figured this out, right? I figured out how to do something. And then 2 months later, it's like, why was I doing it that way? Because this new way that I figured out how to do is 100 times easier, quicker. Tying data in, you can tie different data in, in different ways, whether it be through CSVs or an S3 query or through Power Query. A ton of different stuff you can do in these platforms, and just having a basic understanding can go a long way, because a basic understanding, can get you in the door to company, and then you can be taught pretty quickly if you have a basic understanding of how to actually use the platform correctly.
Okay. So like proficient in, Microsoft tools, specifically Excel, and then someone that really wants to continue to learn, research on their own, be curious, and then obviously pay attention to some of the details. Because I know if you accidentally put a wrong sign in an Excel formula, you will not get the right information.
Correct. And the other thing, and it doesn't just have to be Microsoft products, like Tableau is a great one too. We use Power BI more than Tableau just because Microsoft's platform is better for geolocative data in our experience. So that's the main reason we use Power BI. And they also have the Azure platform, which is super quick, and you can query data from it really quickly. So that's another thing, is understanding databases and how they actually work and how they're tied in, because I could load 40 files into a Power BI, file or, model, I should say. And if you don't know how to actually tie them together, get summary table data from them, things like that, you're not going to be able to produce a product that actually works and isn't broken when you click here. And then if your tables aren't tied correctly, you click one and it doesn't update the data, or it updates, one part and not the other, and it is, wrong, right? Well, understanding databases is very important as well in a basic data analytic role, whether it's an internship or your first full-time role. And I'm still learning every day too. So there's still some things that I don't know that I would like to know. Yeah.
Have you noticed, and maybe this is also a question for Trey as well, but just over, the years that you've been in, data science or data analytics, just how the processes or the software, how things have kind of evolved or changed from even, let's just say 5 or 10 years ago?
I know Trey came from Walmart and Axiom. I know that. And the things he tells us, every day is just the ease of use of these new platforms, and the data is no longer siloed, right? So I can pull in 10 different data sources as long as there's a common denominator between multiples, and whether it be every single file has a common denominator, whether it be a location ID in our case, or a device ID, because we usually link on either bucket ID, which is our location ID of a location we framed out, and then their subsequent devices or home addresses. Those are all links, right, for me. But if you have, if you're in a financial institution, whether it be, a bank, or I'm kind of blanking, but if you're like a financial analyst for, say, Chase Bank or whatever, in the past, that data could have been siloed into many different departments or different databases. And, in my master's, there were horror stories of, some of these large companies that would have, teams and teams of data analysts, and they have to, go to this team to get this data, go to this team to get this data. And then they try to roll all of it up into, one report, and it would look terrible. And the data wasn't telling them anything useful. But now, I mean, whether it's Tableau, Power BI, or any of the number of other ones, you can, have all that data live in the cloud and really pull, whatever you want to pull from it, as long as you know what you're pulling for. And it's the easy use. I can pull 60 million rows in a couple minutes. And I mean, it's super fast. Trey, anything to add on that? You're muted.
Quote of the year, you're on mute.
Yep. He's probably gonna have to call on the phone.
Does say it looks like maybe it's giving him some trouble.
We can move on. We can.
Oh, womp, womp, womp.
That's fine. We're good.
So, I've always said that data is simply just data unless you do something with it. I mean, numbers are just numbers, and information on people is just information unless you know how to manipulate it to get the outcomes or what you're looking for. So what are some of the ways that data analysts add value or impact large businesses? So not only where you work, but also to the organizations that you, I hate to say, but like, are your clients, what value when they come to you with their data are you able to provide them?
So some of that, if we're giving them a model that's just our data, right? So it's, okay, we're looking at a specific location and giving them more information on their consumer base, or, whatever they're looking for, whether it's, quick service restaurants, trucking, automotive space, things like that. The most information in, decision-making ability is what they're looking for. Because if we give them a pretty looking dashboard that has data in it, but it doesn't actually tell them anything in terms of giving them information and insights into, hey, we can improve this in our business, or we should target this kind of person, or we should do this better, right? It doesn't, if you're not giving them that data, the model is pretty much useless to an end client, right? So they have to actually be able to take action on that data. And that's my personal opinion. That's how we've worked for several years. And that probably applies to every other business. If you're a data analyst and you're not giving your CEO or your CFO actionable insights, then it could go without your role, right? So you have to spin the data in a way that makes sense to the CEO. Number one, they have to be able to understand the data. So if you just give them tons and tons of data that doesn't actually cohesive, they're not even going to look at it, right? You also have to, like I said, give them actionable data and insights on, okay, this is what you need to do. This is what's wrong. This is what needs to be fixed. Or in my case, here's a demographic of people that you are under indexing, that live near your location, that aren't going to your location, but your other locations and your competitors, that same group is going in troves to that location, right? So those are some of the things you can do. Was that enough of an answer?
Yeah. So, Trey put in the chat, it's, about getting the data to talk and kind of tell a story. So, yeah, very, very interesting. So
and you don't have to be like a Power BI or a Tableau or a wizard in these platforms to show some kind of a story, right? And if you want, and going back to the building blocks earlier, Power BI, if you get a pro license, I don't know if they offer it with a free license. If you have Power BI desktop, you can download demo data sets from Microsoft and you can load them in and you can start playing with, fake or real data inside Power BI. I haven't really done that in Tableau. And also the Power BI book, on DAX, and then the actual just, building blocks books that Microsoft releases is really good as well in terms of, okay, they give you a data set, you have Power BI desktop, and then, how do I do this? And then you can go research on your own, how do I actually do this? And you can do that without even being hired at a company. If you're trying to get an internship or you're trying to get hired somewhere, you can learn a skill without, having to be hired already. And come to a company and say, okay, I know how to do this. And that might get you in the door. And then from there, you'll learn more and more and more, and then you'll be more comfortable in your role. So, I know I did that with Excel, and before I got hired at ElToro, I, bought a huge Excel book and downloaded a bunch of data sets and taught myself a ton of stuff. And, in my interview, they asked me a bunch of Excel questions because that was one of the main things you have to be good at is Excel. And I answered all the questions. Got a call the next day. They're like, hey, when can you, right? So if I hadn't taught myself that prior, I probably wouldn't have been hired here. I wouldn't be where I am now. So yeah, I'd say hardworking and teaching yourself is one of the keys.
Okay. It's perfect kind of entry into the next question. So, is there a skills shortage in this field? And then, what kind of how can firms go about attracting or engaging the best candidates for this, for this particular role as a data analyst?
I think there is somewhat of a shortage. I know ElToro we're hiring right now, and by proxy properties as well, because we pull some analysts from ElToro that I sit next to, right, and say, hey, I need a little bit of help on this, and they're like, cool. But we are hiring at ElToro, so I mean we have a shortage right now. So from personal experience, we do have somewhat of a shortage as we are hiring for analysts. But one thing that we do really well is we partner with the University of Louisville and their speed program for engineering and their sciences. And so one of the programs that we are heavily involved with is their CIT and then their analytics programs at the master's level. We actually have a couple of guys from ElToro that are adjunct professors at U of L, who, when they find, a student that is proficient, they, once the program is over, they say, hey, do you want an internship at ElToro? And then they come in for an interview. So, and they're teaching them a lot of the stuff that we do every day here in that program. So I think that's one of the things that universities can do is partner with these companies. ElToro's not a massive company, but in Louisville, a lot of people know who we are in Louisville. And we have enough trust in the community to, have some of our employees, be adjunct professors at, one of the biggest universities in Kentucky. I think it is the biggest university in Kentucky. Teach their students, and then we recruit a lot of their students too. The ones that are proficient. So, if Arkansas State or Arkansas, has an opportunity for that kind of a relationship with large companies, I'd say go for it.
Or you could always do the apprenticeship program.
Yeah. Yes.
A little plug right there.
Little plug.
So, moving into what you're looking for or what you're looking for in a person or any advice that you could give to someone pursuing a career. Obviously throughout this, we've kind of heard it. But, what advice would you, or did you wish, or would you wish someone had given you when you were first kind of exploring this industry?
Yeah. So for me, I know Tableau's been around for a while. I wish I had learned more about Tableau and the actual data visualization platforms more in college. My program was more heavily based in statistics and database management and Excel, right, and SPSS and things like that, or in SAS, SAP. I wish that program had had more visuals, right? Because we are visual creatures by nature. We like to see, right? And not just, have an ugly little spreadsheet that tells us something, right? So I wish that I had been told, hey, the world's moving more towards the visual software in visual languages in terms of data analytics. That's one thing. Another one would be that a lot of times you do, like I've already said this a couple of times, but you're going to have to teach yourself a lot of the stuff that you need to know, right? Just because you graduate from a prestigious university doesn't mean you actually fully understand the business that you're interviewing for and what that role would be, right? Because they, in the interview, they're going to ask you a lot of different questions, that could range from, hey, I have this data set here, how would I tie in a different data set into this? That's what, that was one of the questions I had when I got, interviewed was, I have two sets of data, and they literally showed me and they're like, here's two sets of data. How would you fix this? And I was like, okay, give me a couple minutes. And so I looked at it and I was like, okay, this is what I would do here, here, here. They're like, all right, awesome. So I'd say that, no interview is the same. Be prepared. If you don't know the answer right off your head, don't just start talking, just think for a second. You can ask for time, just say, hey, let me think about that for a second. That's just more of an interview type skill. And, have cohesive thoughts, right? Don't blab on, if you're just trying to find an answer, it's better to, in my opinion, remain silent and think about it before you say something that you probably wish you wouldn't have said. But yeah, that's kind of what I would have wished somebody would have told me.
I just wanted to share a few things that Trey had put in chat so that anyone that's not monitoring that or seeing this at a later time, but as Trey mentioned, and you had both mentioned, data, by itself doesn't really have a value. Only data that tells a story has a value. And, showing data is not necessarily answering a question because it can lead to more questions, but telling the story, supported by that data is very powerful.
Yeah. So I'm still getting better at data storytelling. I used to, and I still do this, and as you probably can tell from how much I'm talking and going, kind of in circles on some things, I do tend to go down rabbit holes in looking at the, custom models that I do build within clients. And they're always intrigued and they're always, kind of what I can tell is locked into the conversation. But if I go down too deep of a rabbit hole, then they get lost and it kind of could potentially turn them off or confuse them. Where if you give them, high level insights, initially, then later on you can go into the more granular level data. So I'd say the data storytelling is potentially the most important part of actually building a model. So you can build the prettiest model in the world or the most insightful, model that you could, potentially build. But if you don't know how to actually navigate it, with a client or with your boss, and then tell them, exactly how that data is impactful, then you've lost them, right? Because that's the key, is actually to say, like what Trey said a couple times in here, painting the picture of what the model actually means, and telling the story of how this data is useful is probably the most important part outside of knowing how to build it in the first place.
Sure. So we do have a couple questions.
Yes, I see those.
Yeah. So from Sarah, how do you interact or participate with data scientists?
Okay, so Sarah, is Sarah muted?
Yeah, hey there. So my question is more, maybe talk to me about, when you talk about a data analyst, we're building these charts, you're doing some review of that, but then there is this fuzzy bucket of roles or practice called data science. Are you, do you do data science type activities? Are there some on your team, or do you have some consultants who are trying to say, now that we have this? So tell me how your relationship as an analyst would be with a data science role or practice.
Yeah, so I'm just going to use one of my favorite data scientists at ElToro, Rory. She's really the bones and back end of everything that I do. She builds me, data pipelines. She can automate a lot of my reports for me. So once I build something, I go to her and say, hey, can I get this data stream automated? And then she goes into, Python. They've got like 6 different languages they use. And then she, can create custom connectors within that. She can pre-query data that, so I don't necessarily need every single piece of data that could be pulled. Like if I just do a standard data pull, it's going to be huge comparative to if she can pre-slice it, with her coding. It's a lot smaller and smoother for me. And then she builds a custom connector in an S3 bucket for me. And then we're rocking and rolling from there. So the data scientists, and that's a lot of database backend stuff that she does, just getting the data to me to actually visualize, right? And then she's also really good at interpreting that data as well. And then she's on the dev team. And she then relays it to our CTOs and things like that in terms of how that actually, those processes work. And then for automation as well, she automates all that too.
So it sounds like she does almost 3 jobs if she's a developer and back end, that she's do what I might call data engineering with pipelines and connectors and sort of the flow and the automation of said things with your support. But then if she is also telling the story and trying to gather whether you have interpreted the data and in a reasonable way, whatever, maybe you're applying metrics and values and algorithms on it, is she doing that to then be able to explain that to CTOs and CIOs?
Well, so I'll build the model, and then from there we discuss on automation. So the final model might not necessarily live inside Power BI. And this is a far case or far fringe case. She can then build it, in Python or in her, front end. With the front end team. Now, it might not necessarily be her building the front end product, but the understanding of working with her and her team and then my team is very important. So if we don't have those custom connectors or those pipelines, either pre-built or post-built once we've built something, then automation can't be done, right? So those 2 teams working in conjunction are very important. So once we build it and go over, okay, this is what's in the model, these are the data sources that I'm using. So I can request a data source without her, but once I'm, comfortable with how my model looks and I need it to be automated, I then go to her and say, okay, here's my data sources. Here's what I need in terms of pipeline, right? And then she can get me those connectors and then I replace my source data with those custom pipelines, right?
That makes sense. Yeah.
So that's very important, is understanding how a front end, back end, and then an actual, data pipeline or data engineering team works in conjunction with an analyst. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, great. Some of it is for the audiences who are trying to define different roles when people are saying, I want to do this kind of thing.
Right.
The titles get kind of mishy-mashy and vague. And then depending on the project, lots of us wear multiple hats.
Correct.
We want to see how that's working in your world as we try to. There's so much data. Where do you even start? And you have to start asking some questions. And then what do you do with it after that? I was curious how it's working in your industry.
Correct. Yeah. And if I don't have if there's a data source that I don't have, that I need, that I can't pull myself, I'll say, hey, where can I get this? And then she'll drop me an S3 query, right? And say, here's a source you can use. I was going to say something else. Oh, so like I couldn't build that data pipeline that she does. She's a wizard at that kind of stuff on the back end data stuff. It's pretty incredible. But without that team, I couldn't do my job to its fullest capabilities. And I think, Crystal, that was one of your potential next questions, is automation and how automation helps or could hinder, right?
Yep. Yeah. So, as AI and automation is becoming more prevalent in organizations, how is that affecting your role, both positive and negative?
So far, they're mostly positive. Like Sarah and I just talked, those data pipelines and automation, and having queries be able to be updated at intervals. So if I say, okay, I need this data updated, twice a week, we can set that to update my pipeline twice a week, right? Without that, I would have to then resource every single file, from scratch and just replace. Now that's still doable, but instead of having, the dashboard automatically update twice a week, I would have to then manually take time, out of my day to, where I could be working on something else or helping out, my team with something. I then have to go update a model that's been fully built, right? And take, 30 minutes to an hour to requery everything, make sure everything loaded in correctly. Where if we on the back end have that pipeline correct, it automatically does it itself. Now they could have spent, several hours on getting that pipeline built, but in the long run, if we have a contract with a client for 2 years for a couple $100,000, those 6, 7, 8 hours that the data team spent, getting that pipeline ready is extremely important. So that automation is amazing. And then I don't know, at least in my experience at ElToro, the automation in terms of building pre-built models is a little farther down the road, I think, at least at ElToro. Now I can replace source files in a model that I've already built with a completely new data set. And as long as the data I pulled is, the same type of data, the model will just be replaced, with different data. So whether it's a Taco Bell or a KFC, if I replace the data, it's just going to switch, right? And then you're going to still have the same layout and the same everything. But automating from scratch, a visualization or something like that, to me, I don't know if that would put me out of a job. It could eventually. I'd hate to see it, but right now I think the automation is more helpful than a hindrance for the data analytics world.
Okay. So another question in the chat. In your opinion, would it be better to get really good at one particular skill? So R, Python, SQL, Tableau.
Or I forgot to mention SQL too. I forgot to mention SQL. Understanding SQL, how to join data together, how to pull data from a database is super important. And I would definitely recommend learning SQL, at least at a basic level, as well as Excel, Access, Power BI, Tableau. But in terms of getting better at, really good at one skill, R is really good. Python, I'm pretty basic in Python. I have an understanding of Python and R, SQL. My more refined skills, at least in my role, I'd say I have proficiencies in Excel and Power BI, and then, you know, SPSS and a couple other things. R, to me, I haven't had an extreme use case. We have a couple people on the team that do know R, but we don't use a ton of it yet. I'd say have an understanding of at least, you know, several different platforms or languages. Now, whether you're proficient in them or not, kind of depends on the role that you're wanting to go into, right? If you're wanting to be, you know, a front or back end, you know, Python might be more useful than Tableau, right? Or, you know, same with SQL. Yeah.
Okay. All right, so this one's a long one, but a good one. So working in the analytics industry for the last year, overwhelmed by the constant need to upgrade oneself with RT skill set requirements in the industry. For the last few months as a credit risk analyst, it's using SQL, Excel, DAX, dashboarding skills, holistics, and want to explore my skill set into machine learning, but have no clue on where to start with that. No coding experience. What advice might you have, Quint?
So I'm kind of in the same boat in terms of the coding experience for, you know, what machine learning actually entails. We do have a machine learning team at ElToro. They're, I mean, from what I can tell, they're super geniuses. But I'm rereading this, sorry.
Didn't reiterate it as good as it is.
No, you're fine. Is your role that you are in, are they requiring you to learn more about machine learning, or is this something that you're just wanting to obtain as a skill set?
Hey, Quint, so yeah, there is a requirement, and sooner or later I might be asked to be equipped with the skill set in machine learning.
Gotcha. I'd have to get back to you on that, Crystal. Are you putting out a thing after this if there's any unanswered questions?
I believe so.
Yes, we absolutely will. Yeah.
Okay. I don't have an answer for you on that one yet. I know we do have a machine learning team. I don't really work with them directly, you know, every day. But I do know we do have a machine learning team, and some of our back end stuff is, you know, automated to, you know, have machine learning and AI.
I hope my question is pretty clear. What I'm trying to put on here is like having no coding experience. I was like prior to this working into a manufacturing sector as a process engineer, working in a plant. So I recently took this switch, and for the last 1 year, I've been working in the analytics industry. So like I really want to take that leap. So I've already acquired these Tableau,
Yeah.
DAX, and Excel uses. I also have pretty good experience on Excel with DAX and all. But that machine learning thing is not coming very handy to me. So like that there is, I wanted to know how could I reach, and what are the steps, simple steps which I could take on to master into, or basically begin with machine learning.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't really know on the machine learning one where to start. I can probably this week get more information from our machine learning team on some of the stuff that they do, and, you know, some of the
Cool. No issues.
and languages that they use, and, you know, where you could potentially start learning more about, you know, machine learning and things like that.
Thank you.
Does anyone we'll open up for some questions now. Does anyone have any, you know, questions that have not gotten answered?
I did have a quick question, and sorry I had to come a bit late. Have you used Kaggle at all, or gotten involved with the communities on Kaggle to learn data science, Quint?
I have not. No. For the past 2 years, I've been on the data analytics research and development team at ElToro. And most of the stuff that we do is, for internal purposes. And, I know I'm swamped every single day. Every single day there's something new. So I know, this week I'm working on, a specific project for a Fortune 500 company. Next week, it'll probably be something completely different. And it's, very, very time consuming on a lot of the stuff. In the beginning, we said we're a little, as an industry, understaffed. We're hiring here at ElToro in properties. So yeah, I haven't really had a ton of extra time outside of, normal workday to get involved with, Kaggle or any other of those, organizations.
Any other questions, comments? Do you want to read that, Quint, or you want me to? From Trey.
Oh yeah, sure. So ElToro, we have 150 employees. I've been with the company since mid 2016. Like I mentioned, my first job was an intern, and I got promoted to operations analyst, in the ad operations team. And then for the past 2 years, I've been a data analyst for the research and development team. And then we spun off properties to focus more solely on commercial and residential real estate and insights for those companies. Properties, we have, 6 employees, you, me, Ryan, Dan, and then Bart sometimes is on there, and then our CTO. But yeah.
Okay. Any additional questions?
I still have my normal responsibilities at ElToro too. I'm kind of working at 2
You have so much free time during the day.
Yeah, so much free time.
So I have a question too. So, as you were talking about all the data and you're looking at it and you're telling a story, what do you do to just not have all the things run together? What's during your day to just kind of refresh your mind, your eyes? What is something that you do to kind of help you just?
Well, so with COVID, I've been working at home a lot, right? And some of the team guys and girls are back in the office on operations and R&D. I just had a kid, so back in September. So when things are kind of, hectic, I go in the other room and, snuggle my baby. So that's what I do now. At work, our work environment's really, really amazing, at the office. We just moved into a new office space back in, Trey, what was it, June? We moved 4 blocks down the street because we outgrew the smaller location. You can bring your dog to work every day. So when I'm there, I'll bring my husky or my other dog. We have foosball, we have ping pong, we have pinball. There's, N64, PlayStation, Xbox upstairs. There's breakout rooms. There's some dice games. We could play a game called Set. If Dan's, in the office, Dan's the founder of ElToro. If he's in the office and you hear Set, like if you hear somebody yell Set really loud, it's Dan yelling Set for us to go play a game with him and lose some money, right? To Dan. So it's really, the work environment's really awesome. So if you feel super bogged down in a day, you can, take a break with, any number of the amenities that we have. So I think that's another key thing in, a lot of these tech companies is we tried to model it, kind of after the Google space, in terms of you work hard, play hard, but you always work harder, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think
I see you left something out, but Trey.
Oh, Trey, sorry. I don't drink the bourbon, so I kind of forget. We have, I'm not going to quote this, but I believe we have a top 5 largest bourbon collection in Kentucky. So if you all don't know, you'll probably get bourbon. Your bourbon will come from Kentucky. I think 98% of the world's bourbon comes from Kentucky. Most of that comes within 50 miles of where we work. So we have, I think, over 1,500 bottles of bourbon in our office, in a bourbon bar in the lounge area. I put a couple bottles in that as well. My dad gave me a couple bottles, and I'm like, I don't drink, but I'll put these in here. They're, collector level stuff. They've got Pappy Van Winkle in there. They have some stuff that's, $2,000 to $3,000 a bottle. Now obviously you're still going to have your Old Forester, 86s and your low level stuff that's actually the drinkable stuff. But yeah, don't ever drink a top shelf one without, a major client in the office, or your boss will kill you. So
good advice.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be mindful. I know we're getting close to noon. Any other additional questions? Data or bourbon bar related?
I did have another question, a little bit more data related. You mentioned commercial real estate. Have you found any really good tools for working with geographic data? You mentioned Power BI. Is it out of the box functionality?
So Power BI, so all of our data is time-stamped in latitude and longitude. So when we frame out a commercial location, whether it be, I'll just use an example, KFC, say Louisville has, 25 KFCs in the region. We'll frame all those out with all their competitors. Each one of those frames we draw around that building in the immediate parking lot is going to have a latitude and longitude to the, I think, 11th decimal on that. When we pull devices from that and we tie them back to a home address, so we do tie, I think, 60% of devices we see in the wild back to a home address. You can't pull every single one. There's just not enough data sometimes at the device level correlated to a house, right? So then we have a latitude and longitude of home addresses seen at a KFC, right? So then if you use a Habersign formula and link those two data sets together, you're going to have 4 geolocative data points. You're going to have a latitude and longitude for the device where it resides at home, and then you're going to have a latitude and longitude for that location. And then you can get kind of into the drive time and radial stuff of that. So then I can put different filters on and say, okay, I want to see the difference between a consumer who lives 1 mile from a KFC or a competitor of a KFC versus one that lives 10 miles away, right? And then all those are plotted out. Does that answer your question?
I think so. And all of that's pretty much done in Power BI, or is there?
Yeah, it is.
Is there an engine to convert addresses to latitude, longitude?
So that our system internally does that. So there are free tools, I believe, but there's limiters on them. I don't know, the USPS might have one. CoreLogic definitely has one. So our internal grid, where we have the US mapped, not the IP map, but the actual, parcel level data of a map, we use CoreLogic for that. And so they have, those parcels, correlated out. And I don't know if we get the lat long from that or we internally build a lat long into that. But either way, when it comes to me, I don't have to do anything in terms of getting a latitude or a longitude. It's the query is already there for me to pull that.
So most of your analysis would be looking at the buckets of things like drive time and helping people understand decisions in terms of demographic buckets.
So once we get a home address, data set, we can then throw that into what we call our behavior scapes, which, whether that be, an Experian level file, and saying, okay, there's 72 different profiles that you, me, and everyone in here could fall into, in terms of your psychographics and demographics. Just because you have, make a ton of money doesn't mean you're American royalty. There's different levels within each, A, B, C, D level in Experian. And those people tend to cluster relatively close to one another. Like kids in cabaret would be, young adult, or not young adults, 30 to 40-year-old parents with a couple kids that have a ton of money, right? That's different than somebody who's 30 to 40 with no kids and a ton of money, right? There's different priorities in life. And so we can then take the consumer data, consumer level data that we're seeing, pulling those devices from a specific location of their competitors, and then providing an end client with, okay, of the 10,000 people we saw at your establishment, we saw 2,000 of them go to your direct competitor. Those 2,000 people, here's their breakout in terms of demographic profiles, right? And then they can either use our system to do that targeting, because ElToro is an ad tech platform. So we target home addresses and devices based on an IP address being active on a website with predefined, which is predefined. So we're not using any cookies or things like that to target. If a client comes to us and says, I want to get this message in front of these people, we take that, digital ad or video ad. When an IP is active in our segment that we've identified, we're only going to target those active IPs, right? We don't care whether you're on Fox News, CNN, Reddit. We don't care where you go. All we care is that our client gave us a list of people, or we obtained a list of people to target on their behalf with their ad, and only those people are going to see that ad. So the mesh of our core technology in terms of being able to target IP addresses that are associated to homes is really important for the actual modeling stuff that I do, right? Because I'll identify a segment based on a demographic or whatever the client's looking for, and then we can take that and target it with their specific messaging, right? And only those people. They could then subsequently, if they're using Facebook, Google Ads, whatever, they can say, okay, we see this particular segment of demographic profiles performing much better than all the other ones, and then they can find other avenues to use that to target. But we still did our job and provided them with value, and they're still going to pay us, right, for that insight. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it makes sense how it kind of links with your core platform too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. I think we might have to wrap it up. We're 1 minute to 12. So Marie dropped in the chat that if anyone has any additional questions or anything that you may think of, between now and whenever, just send it to admin@ACDS, and we will get that over to Quint and Trey. So I just want to take a moment and thank Quint and Trey for being with us, and let's everyone just give them a round of applause. So I just learned that this is the virtual round of applause when you're on mute. So learn something new every day. And before we go, I just, we really want to wish everyone a wonderful holiday and happy new year. And we want to encourage you to join us in 2021 for our Tech After 5 events, which are every second Thursday of each month from 5:30 to 7 p.m., which brings together, the community, partners, job seekers, employers, data analysts, all together for the evening in a virtual networking event. So without, making sure we end right at noon. Again, thank you guys so much. Really appreciate attendees, and Quint and Trey cannot thank you enough for sharing your wisdom. And we will talk to everyone soon.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon, everyone.